Okay, hi. So, I messed up my cover art the first time. Izawa's eyes are onyx, actually. The color onyx. Um, and they turn red when he uses erasure. So he kind of don't look like he has a pupil. But I usually draw eyeballs like this, so I may keep him with the red eyes just because it's easier to see the eyeballs. Just due to how I draw eyeballs, you know? Also, I just realized my own cat doesn't have eyeball lights. That's fun. I'm not fixing it because that's a pain. Anyway, um, this is chapter 2 of I Borrowed a Cat's Paws by CrouchingTiger28. Same things as last time. The author's Discord will be in the description. Same with series, playlists I'm gonna make because I'm doing all of the Cat's Paws series, even though I know it's not finished, but I love the series still, so we're gonna do what we can. I'm gonna podfic the first two and the one okay, there's our daily fucking notification. AP, why? When your podficker friend adds you. Anyway. Okay. Like I said, I'm not rereading tags. Check the description for a shit ton of stuff and context. Permission is only going to be on chapter 1 because showing Discord every time takes a lot of time. And let's get to it. This is chapter 2 of I Borrowed a Cat's Paws by Crouching Tiger. The world fell apart with a sound like 100 windows shattering simultaneously. This was a sound that Shota knew intimately. He had discovered in his second year at UA that when Hazashi was sufficiently startled, or sufficiently petty, he could make a sound that humans couldn't hear, but that was at the exact right frequency to shatter UA shatterproof windows. Shota paused for an instant to lament that. With proper training, Jiro could probably do the same. And since he now knew that, he'd have to tell her. Then he bolted towards the disturbance. Instinct fully took over, and Shota balanced on ledges he never would have dared, and took leaps that he knew he would have botched if he thought about them. He bound from one thin rail to another, jumping from bike rack to windowsill to a pavilion protruding over a storefront. The pavilion was a steep angle, but Shota dashed across it so fast he barely even touched ground. And from there, he leapt across a line of stopped traffic before racing down the sidewalk at full tilt. Shota had to quickly change course as the sidewalk in front of him was suddenly covered in broken glass. The broken glass sent him to the tops of signs, the edges of trash cans, and even across the seat of an abandoned bicycle. But it meant he was getting close. It was only as he neared the epicenter of the damage that Shota realized what he was doing. He was a cat. What chance did he have against any human? Even if the human relied entirely on their quirk, which Shota could erase for pretty much as long as he wanted. They were still 10 times his size. He was pulling off jumps he was sure even a regular cat would struggle with. So, likely his parkour skills had translated into cat form. But even if his fighting skills had done that, Shota was still only a 4 kilogram house cat. On the other hand, If there was literally any other hero on the scene with Shota, there to erase the villain's quirk, their job would be immeasurably easier. Mind made up, Shota continued around the corner that given him pause, slinking along the ledge on the side of the building. How'd he gotten onto that ledge was a bit of a blur, and he was sure if he wasn't used to jumping off roofs, he would have fallen off already. But it served its purpose for now. There was a trio of people standing in front of a storefront. The only three people on the street. They all looked very similar, with the same face shape and body structure, along with nearly identical spiky hair that Shota was pretty sure was green. The one in front was swearing up a blue streak, his closed fist still pressed against what appeared to be the sole surviving window in at least a block. There were shards of broken glass whirling around him, seething and flashing like a living thing. Shota mentally dubbed him Glassbreaker. Are you done? The only woman of the group drawled. She was wearing the combined half and half gloves usually used by people with 5-point activation quirks. And when she brushed a strand of hair from her face, it crackled like warming ice. No, Glassbreaker said fiercely, kicking the wall and then swearing as he jammed his toe. Would you just let me turn it to glass? 5-Point said, exasperated. I thought your quirk didn't work on composite materials. The last one said tentatively. His skin was glossy and reflective, and he was pretty translucent, as though he was made entirely of stained glass. It's just plexiglass. 5-Point rolled her eyes, already peeling off a glove. It works fine on plexiglass. But Windowplane was silenced by 5-Point waving her now bare hand at him pointedly. Hush! She turned her attention to Glassbreaker, who was now cursing in a lower voice. Would you get out of the way? Glassbreaker grumbled, but moved aside. 5-Point reached towards the window, and Shota activated Erasure. All 5 figures made contact. Nothing happened. 5-Point pulled her hand back, frowning at the window. Told you, Windowpane muttered. No, it should have worked! 5-Point snapped. It's definitely just plexiglass. Why didn't it work? Did you check your hair? Glassbreaker drawled. 5-Point's gloved hand flew to her hair, which cracked and crunched as she carted her hand through it. She frowned harder. What the? Try again, Windowpane suggested, rocking on his heels and suddenly tapping the window they were so interested in. 5-Point touched the window again, then flattened her hand on it. Whatever she was expecting to happen completely failed. She let out a frustrated snarl and slammed the side of her fist against the window. It barely even shuddered. Hey! Shota had, of course, heard the footsteps approaching, but he hoped whoever it was had the sense to sneak up on the villains properly. Alas, as with most daylight heroes, this one had no grasp of the element of survive. 5-Point cursed, whirling to face the hero as she off, ripped her other glove off. Glassbreaker turned with her, more broken glass flying to join his cloud from the nearby street and sidewalk. Even Windowpane moved towards him, likely against his will, as it was more of a stumble than a step. Windowpane had actually made Windowpane was actually made of glass then. Interesting. It seemed like a quirk that would make him very fragile without some other augmentation, especially around the joints, where there was likely tiny fractures whenever he moved. What are you three doing here? The hero asked, almost bouncing as she approached the trio. Haven't you heard? There's an active villain threat in this area. For a moment of eternal exhaustion, Shota thought she was being serious. Then he finally released a racer and turned towards the hero, and he barely recognized her for a moment. Rebound. A hero with a personality similar to Miss Joke. Her quirk, Barricade, let her form barriers that acted as immovable walls whenever she placed them. She was lower on the rankings, one of the rank and file heroes, rather than a hotshots at the top. But Shota made it his business to know every hero active in Shinjuku-do, daylight or underground. The trio of villains caught in the act of, at the very least, mass vandalization and destruction of private and government property, shared a confused look. Their expression practically screamed, "Is she for real?" She was, in fact, for real. Shota watched as Rebound stepped closer to the villains, waving her hands in a way that would look like exuberance to most, but Shota recognized as the almost tossing motion she used to set up her quirk. The barriers, not usually nigh invisible, even to Shota, seemed almost painfully evident now. They glimmered faintly, with a subtle perpetual motion, like a heat shimmer in the air. It could be dangerous out here, Rebound said, her voice full of false concern. We haven't pinned down the villain's exact location yet, but they're likely to be somewhere very near here. Glassbreaker opened his mouth, probably to say something insulting, scornful, or both, but stopped short as he took a step forward and ran directly into the barely visible barrier. Hey, what did you do? Rebound hastily made several more tossing motions, and Shota saw more barriers snap into place behind the villains. Didn't you hear? Rebound said, still with false innocent air. There's a group of villains in this area. Right around here. You think you're so clever, don't you? 5 Point sneered, stalking forward to stand beside Glassbreaker. She slammed her hand against the barrier, and Shota was too slow to activate Erasure. Thin cracks spread over the barrier like a spiderweb fracture, creeping all the way to the edge of the barrier. The cracks thickened, turning into shiny copper soldering, and the shimmering, almost invisible material of the barrier turned into glossy frosted glass. Shota couldn't tell what color it was, but it was at least several different shades, each piece different from the ones next to it. Glassbreaker lifted his hand, but this time Shota beat him to it. The swarm of broken glass swirling around him all dropped to the ground at once, a cacophony of glass clattering against itself. And the stained glass wall remained obstructedly intact. All three of the glass siblings were clearly thrown for a loop, and 5 Point sneered at Glassbreaker like it was his fault his quirk had up and stopped working. Shota might have grinned if he'd been in his usual human shape. Glassbreaker snarled back and put his fist through the stained glass wall. He was wearing thick gloves, likely for the express purpose of handling broken glass, and he barely even faltered as the stained glass rained down around him. Well, that's usually not supposed to happen, Rebound said chipperly. I don't suppose you could be convinced to step back a bit. She made a vague shooing gesture that Shota could only barely see from the corner of his eye. Yeah, sure. Windowpane took a step back, directly into a pile of broken glass. Glassbreaker had dumped on the ground when its quirk was erased. As he stepped into on the pile, it vanished, and he got bigger, much bigger. Shota transferred his erasure-induced glare to Windowpane, but it appeared the damage was already done. Windowpane was now easily twice the size of an average human, built like All Might with long, serrated claws of glass instead of fingers. He stepped forward again, moving past Glassbreaker and Five Point, who were both smirking at Rebound now. Methinks that may not be ideal. Rebound tapped her cheek thoughtfully, gesturing vaguely at Windowpane, and a barrier snapped into existence in front of him. But Windowpane went right around it, almost like he could see exactly where it was. Rebound tossed another barrier, this one horizontal, right in front of Windowpane. It had nearly clotheslined him before he could even react. Dark fractures cracked into existence in Windowpane's neck as he stumbled back, shaking his head. Five Point and Glassbreaker were moving again, and with no other hero appearing to help Rebound, that job fell on Shota. He couldn't cancel both quirks at once, so he had to go one at a time. Shota leapt down from the ledge in two huge jumps, all the way down to the now empty asphalt. He took off across the empty street, beelining straight for 5 points. A 5 point activation quirk, by definition, required 5 points of contact to activate. Shota wasn't going to bite any fingers off, even if he could. 5 Point hadn't yet done anything that merited such an extreme response, but that didn't stop him from biting. 5 Point yelped, pointing at him as Shota bolted towards her, and Glassbreaker scrambled away with a frantic curse. Shota ignored Glassbreaker entirely, leapt up towards 5 Point's hand, erasure flared behind his eyes, and he instinctively wrapped his legs around 5 Point's wrist and arm, biting down hard on her extended pointer finger. The world turned into a nauseating blur as 5 Point started shrieking and flailing wildly, shouting and swearing, and even jumping up and down. Shota flattened his ears and dug his teeth in deeper. Help me! 5 Point shrieked, and a pair of hands dug at Shota's side, ripping him off 5 Point and dropping him hastily on the ground. Shota landed on his feet and whirled on Glassbreaker, who was already sneezing. He was sneezing. Huge gasping sneezes that left his eyes watering and sounded like he was trying to expel one of his lungs. Well, that made things a lot easier for Shota. He went for 5 Point's other hand. He got a worse grip this time, and could only sink his teeth into the webbing between her thumb and pointer finger. But the shaking and screaming and swearing it elicited was the same. Get it off yourself! Glassbreaker shouted over 5 Point's squalling. His voice sounded rough and congested, but not like he was in danger of asphyxiation. I'm not touching that thing! Shota squirmed forward a bit on 5 Point's next swing and viciously bit the tip of her thumb. She shrieked again and started frantically repeating, "Get it off, get it off, get it off, get it off!" Let me help you with that. The world abruptly stopped shaking, and Shota found Rebound staring over him, smiling innocently. At 5 Point as she gripped the villain's wrist with one hand. Shota let go of 5 Point's thumb, looking around warily. Five Window pane looked a lot smaller, almost childlike size, and he was trapped in a small box made of Rebound's barriers. Glassbreaker was still sneezing, his eyes watering ferociously, but he had been fitted with a pair of quirk-canceling handcuffs that were looped around a thin, pole-like barrier anchored to the asphalt. Shota tried to let go of 5 Point's wrist, but found that his cat brain wouldn't let him, only gripping harder. He pushed down his feline instinct and manually pried his paws away, dropping heavily to the ground. "Why don't you take a trip with me?" Rebound said, and Shota found himself scooped up into her arms. Don't want you don't want you to step on any glass, huh, kitty? As a racerhead, Shota had interacted with Rebound exactly twice. The first had been from a distance, when they'd both been on the same bus, and she struck him as obnoxiously cheerful and far too awake for the 6 o'clock action. The second had been more direct, when one of Shota's longer, more involved cases had spilled into immediate daylight threat. He didn't know a whole lot about Rebound, but from what he gathered from those two interactions, he'd got the impression of a present Mike-like persona. She was cheerful and bubbly, but she played it up and overemphasized to get people to underestimate her. Fortunate that the police station is so nearby, Rebound mused aloud as a patrol car pulled up several meters away. The barriers are only around him. Rebound waved at Windowpane, who was pressing a hand against the barrier above him. And there's a pole there. The officer nodded, moving towards Glassbreaker. "I'm going to go ahead to the station," Rebound reported. The officer's partner gave Shota a strange look, but offered Rebound a parting nod. Shota squirmed out of her arms as soon as she started walking, clawing out of her grip. He didn't want to step on any broken glass, and now he wasn't driving exclusively with his hero muscle memory. He doubted he could make half the jumps he'd taken without even thinking on his way to the scene of the crime. He also didn't want to be carried around like a baby, though, and Rebound's costume was tough enough that Shota could claw his way onto her shoulder. Balancing was a bit tricky, but Shota could balance on a lot of precarious perches even as a human. Once he had a feel for his balance and the way Rebound moved, the extra grip his claws gave him made it practically child's play. The 2 blocks to the police station practically flew by. After spending most of the day as a cat, human walking speed was actually an upgrade. "Rebound," an officer greeted the moment she walked through the lobby. "I'm just here to drop off this cat," Rebound said cheerfully, slipping into the bullpen. "It's clearly a hero in training." "Rebound," Namasa sighed. He was sitting at his desk, and it looked like he'd been there for a while. It may have been hypocritical of Shota to think, but did that man even sleep? He'd been showing no signs of stopping when Shota had left around 2 in the morning, and here he was, at his desk again, or maybe at his desk still, judging by the tired exasperation and the heavy bags under his eyes. Shota suspected it was still. I'm not kidding, Rebound objected. It took down 2 villains single-handedly. That gave Namasa pause. It Shota was sure it had rung truthfully to his quirk. Or would that be single-pawed? Rebound mused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Rebound? Namasa sighed again. Somehow more exhausted this time. I think it's possibly single-pawed, Shota said, or rather, he let out a thoughtful nah that made Namasa look at him like he'd sprouted a second head. That cat just told the truth. Rebound blinked, startled before recovering a split second later and beaming at Namasa. Told you. Is Sansa in? Namasa asked his palms, which he buried his face in. Dunno, Rebound said. Should I go look for him? No, just leave the cat here, Namasa said. Head back to your route. I'll send someone else. Shoulda jumped down from Rebound's shoulder and gave her a chipper agreement. Managed to land perfectly between the manila folder labeled with a case number and Namasa's cup of cold coffee. He tracked Rebound's footsteps with one ear as she wandered away, but he didn't break eye contact with Namasa. You're not an ordinary cat, Namasa said finally. Shota nodded. You can understand me, can't you? Shota nodded again. He was sure he was smiling now. Unlikely, just as unsettling on a cat's face as it was on his usual human face. Just what I needed, Namasa despaired. Oh, how Shota wished he could imitate Nezu's signature cackle. He could get close as a human, but he was about 99% sure a cat's throat couldn't even make that noise. Sir? Officer Santa. Instantly, Namasa was straight-backed and professional, sorting his papers with an absent-minded tap. He looked up at Sansa and then visibly hesitated, apparently bracing himself for the bizarreness of the question he was about to ask. Can you talk to cats? Officer Sansa stared at Namasa, unblinkingly. He slowly turned to look at Shota. Well, can you? Shota asked. Sansa's ears flattened sideways. Not usually? Well, usually cats don't tell the truth either, Namasa sighed. I feel like I should be able to understand him, Sansa said slowly, but only on an instinctual level. Enough to answer yes or no questions? Namasa asked. Probably. Okay. Namasa briefly pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes. Okay. Do you want to interview the cat? Sir? I need to. Namasa waved vaguely at the folder Shota was sitting next to. Its Sansa's whiskers drooped. He looked conflicted, his gaze darting between Shota, the folder, and Namasa. Are you sure you shouldn't get some outside help on that, sir? Sansa asked cautiously. I'd be willing to look it over with you. Namasa rubbed his eyes, staring at the folder like it might at any second turn into an obituary. His tired gaze turned to Sansa. Shota had seen that look before. That was Namasa's look of judgment. Like it was a bit like Nezu's appraisal of usefulness, and Shota had been reliably informed that he had a similar expression. It was a look that meant, can I trust you with this? And how can I use you to my benefit? And will you get in my way? Clearly, Sansa recognized it too, as he straightened under Namasa's inspection. Fine. Namasa agreed finally. Sansa hid his relief well, but Shota noticed his ears relax from their stiffly alert posture. Why don't we reach out to someone who can actually talk to cats? Sansa suggested carefully. There's that kid from UA. Namasa stared at Sansa blankly. The look on his face was clearly showed that he hadn't even considered that. Now, Shota was actually getting concerned. Just how long had Namasa been working? He was usually a hard worker, but this was getting extreme, even for him. He only got this invested when it was personal, important, or both. Good idea, Namasa said after a worrying pause. Good idea. I'll call Nezu. You can take this folder. Namasa slid the folder off the desk and handed it to Sansa. And follow me to get to rest. Remember, this is a need-to-know case, Officer Sansa. Yes, sir. Sansa agreed, accepting the folder from Namasa and falling in behind him. Cats? Namasa looked like he was dying a little bit inside. Stay here. We'll be back in a minute. Shota nodded, settling onto his stomach to wait as Namasa stepped out of the room, Sansa hot on his heels. They had been gone for less than a minute when a pair of officers entered the bullpen. Shota glanced at them briefly, and then sent his head back down. He never entirely understood Cat's urge to lie in a sunbeam before, but the slice of light falling over Namasa's desk made him feel like he could sleep for a year. Hey, what's that cat doing in here? Shota had lifted his head and even opened his eyes, excited to see the cat, before being forcefully reminded by the muzzle in his vision that he was the cat. It probably shouldn't be here, one of the officers said dubiously. It's lying on Sakachi's desk, the other pointed out. He's got the folders and stuff. The classified stuff with All Might? Yeah. Shota tipped his head at the two officers, who were both staring at him with nervous expressions. I feel like the cat shouldn't be here. Should we try to get rid of it? The officer shared a look and then started towards Shota. Immediately, Shota was on his feet, shaking off the warm lithography up from the sunbeam. What do you think the odds are that it's a law-abiding cat? The officer on the left asked. His eyes shone dark blue as he spoke. It Shota arched his spine, ready to activate Erasure at a moment's notice, but unwilling to give away his ace in the hole before they did something actually threatening. A cat, the officer said flatly. Law-abiding? Yes, definitely. The first one replied, his eyes flooding solid blue. Should have activated Erasure, but picked the wrong target. Stop, the officer without the blue eyes ordered. It showed his fur flattened, spine straightening, and Eraser releasing without any conscious input. Get off the desk and leave the way you came. Don't come back. Shota's body moved without his input. It felt sort of like when his Toshi controlled him, but not exactly. With Hotoshi, it was like he was looking at his own body from far away. This was more like there was a glass wall between his mind and his body. Because that was just what he needed, on top of being a cat. Blue Eyes even held the door open for him, letting Shota slink out towards the front, the way he'd come in. You think that'll work? Commanding voice asked. Ask again later. And then the door slid shut, and Shota was still moving, all the way out onto the street. I. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. Sippy tea. Okay. Do check the description because I will have a shit ton of links in there and crap. Um, if you want permission bullshit, go to chapter 1 and listen to my 11 minutes of rambling. I have it in there. I don't know where exactly, but it's in those first 11 minutes. I think that was the most rambles I've ever done. And on the one shot I did, there was a phone number, and I didn't know that there was like a fake phone number thing, like the 555 thing. I didn't know that was a thing, and the amount of people that were mentioning that, um, the reason I actually put that there wasn't because I was worried about the fake number. I was worried about YouTube more than that. YouTube is known to like demonetize and smite creators that have phone numbers at all in their videos. That's why I stated that. It wasn't a I thought the phone number was real because I was pretty damn sure it wasn't a real number. Like I didn't try it, but I was pretty damn sure it wasn't a real number. Um but it was more of I didn't want YouTube on my ass for having a number that doesn't exist in the thing. Good to know that it actually is a showbiz number though. Like one of those fake numbers they use on TV sets and bullshit like that. That was cool to learn. Anyway, this is chapter 2. I hope you liked that. I think I'm gonna record chapter 3 tomorrow. I think that's how I'm gonna do this. I had to record this before 3 p.m. because the sibling thing is at school, and I didn't want her voice to come all into it. And if I was meowing, she was gonna ask about it. Last time I was recording meows, she was like, "Is there an actual cat in the house?" No, it's me meowing. Oh my god. Anyway, I do have one blooper. So bye. Expert. Okay.